All right, folks, today we're kicking off a short series of videos that is going to go through my entire traditional archery shot cycle, and we're going to be talking about stance and posture on today's video, so stick around. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of stance and posture, I want to remind you to go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you're not already, because throughout this series, in this video and the ones that are going to come after, we're going to go through every step of my shot cycle, and I'm going to explain to you why I do things the way that I do them, because a lot of the things that I do are or could be contradictory to what a field archery coach or an Olympic style coach might tell you to do. I'm going to explain why I have settled on shooting the way that I do. We're going to talk about all the physical aspects of my shot cycle, and then we're also going to talk about the mental side of things. We're going to revisit aiming and how I aim my bows for the type of situations that I shoot under most often. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started with the stance and posture. Now, when it comes to archery stance, there's a couple of common things that you're going to hear. You're going to hear about a closed stance and then an open stance most often. I'll just briefly explain what a closed stance is, and then we're going to move on to an open stance, because for the type of situations that I find myself in, a closed stance just doesn't work for me very well. When you hear people talk about archery stance, they're primarily talking about your foot position in relation to that target there. And so if I take my arrow, lay it on the ground, pointing right at that target, a neutral stance or a closed stance would be standing with your feet about shoulder width apart and your toes are pretty much right on that line. So you're standing perfectly perpendicular to that target and you're shooting across your body. Now, an open stance would be you would take this lead foot, move it back just a little bit, and then take your toe and point it towards the target just slightly. If I'm shooting on level ground in a field or something like this, this is the stance that I most often just naturally gravitate to. Now, if you're a bow hunter, especially if you're hunting in colder weather, an open stance has an advantage of clearing the string path past your chest. If you're trying to shoot with a closed stance or have your back foot away from that line, a really closed stance, it tends to make string clearance an issue, especially if you have bulky clothing. And so by moving that front foot back a little bit, you can open that up so you don't have the problem of your string dragging across your chest there. So if I'm shooting on flat ground, I naturally gravitate to a little bit of an open stance, but really I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. And the reason being is that I am primarily a bow hunter and I do a lot of hunting from the ground in the mountains. And it's a very rare occasion when I get to choose the type of terrain that I'm going to be shooting from. And so I need to be able to shoot from all kinds of different positions, from having one foot up on a log or kneeling or even sitting down. But if you are just learning archery, paying attention to your stance is going to be important, because you need to develop a type of consistency. You need to learn how to do things within the rules before you start breaking the rules. All right, so now that we've got the foot position down, we're going to talk about your body position. So the knees, you don't want to really lock them out. You don't want to be squatting down like this. Archery stance and posture is all about being as stable as you possibly can. And the most stable position, for me anyway, is a little bit of an open stance, the legs straight but not locked, and slightly, so when I open my stance up like this, I'm pivoting, and that's gonna put a little bit of tension into my core and help me to be a little bit more stable. Now, my hips are directly over my feet, my shoulders are over my hips, so I'm not leaning forward, I'm not putting more weight on my front leg, I'm not leaning back, putting more weight on my back leg. One of the things that you're gonna see new archers doing quite often is leaning back, especially if they're shooting a bow that has a draw length that's a little bit too long for them. You'll really see them lean back like this. You don't want to be doing that. You want to keep everything in line. Shoulders over the hips, hips over the feet. Perfect. All right, so what about just your general posture? One thing that I notice with new archers is oftentimes they want to push their chest out, and they want to draw like this. They want to really get those shoulders back, push that chest out, and that's not really what you want to do. The way that I shoot my bow is that after I get my foot position right, I'm going to round my back out a little bit. Instead of poking my chest out like this, I'm actually going to do the opposite. And I'm going to round my back out, which kind of hollows my chest out. I find that that makes me a little bit more stable, but then it also, again, helps to clear that string from coming in contact with my chest and my bow shoulder. Now, I'm not really leaning over and poking my butt out like that. I'm still maintaining my hips over my feet and my shoulders over my hips. But all I'm doing is caving my chest. I'm just rolling my back out a little bit and hollowing my chest out just a little bit. Wind's gonna blow me over. So your stance and your posture in combination with good archery form is going to make you as stable as you can possibly be. And what that's going to translate into is less drift around the point on that target where you want to hit. When I'm talking about drift, what I mean is if you take an arrow or your finger even and point it at some object, it's going to be impossible to hold that arrow unmoving on that object. There's going to be some slight movement, some drift. Good stance, good posture, and good form is going to reduce that drift as much as possible. Now later on in this series, when we start talking about form and aiming, we're going to talk a lot more about drift, and I'm going to see if I can get my hands on a laser pointer so that you can actually see how much drift I actually have at varying distances when I am at full draw and ready to shoot. All right, so let's talk a little bit about head position. This is one of the areas where you're going to see me differ from most of the instruction that you're going to find from Olympic style coaches or field archery style coaches. So the typical advice that people are going to give you is to get your posture right, get your stance right, all that stuff, and keep your head straight in between your shoulders and just turn your head towards the target. You draw to your face. You do not drop your head. You do not change your head position. Now that is great advice. It's very good advice that I don't pay attention to. If you watch any of my shooting videos, you will notice that when I come back to full draw, I drop my head to the target, or I drop my head to the string. That is generally not very good advice. It is, if you're just learning archery or if you've been shooting for a long time, it really is more repeatable. It's easier to get a repeatable head position if you don't move your head at all. So why do I do that? Why do I drop my head to the string? For the type of shooting situations that I'm in most often, especially when I'm hunting, I am shooting at relatively short distances. We're talking somewhere between 5 and 20 yards. And if I try to shoot with my head straight up and I come back to anchor, my eye is not very close to my arrow. And what that means is it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to aim at those shorter distances. And so the reason that I drop my head towards the string is it gets my eye closer to the nock of this arrow and it makes it easier to aim. Now, I don't want to get, in this video, I'm not going to get super in-depth into the aiming side of things. If you want to check that out, I've got some other videos from a couple of years ago that really break down the way that I aim my bows. And then later in this video series, we're going to revisit that. But just for the time being, just understand that the reason that I drop my head towards the string is for those shorter distances. In hunting situations that I find myself in, it makes it a little bit more easy to, or a little bit easier for me to aim. Now with that said, for a beginning archer, I don't know that I would recommend that you do that, because having a consistent head angle, having a consistent placement of your eye relative to that arrow is going to be very important. And it's very important all the time. And so when you start moving your head and dropping your head towards the string, it makes it very easy to have inconsistencies in that angle or that distance of your eye to the arrow's nock. Because if I come back to full draw and I tip my head this much on one shot and this much on another shot, that's gonna make a big difference in your point of impact downrange. So no matter what you do, you're gonna have to find some way to have a repeatable head angle from shot to shot. All right guys, that's gonna do it for this video. On the next video, I think we're gonna be talking about bow hand position and canting your bow. So again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. And get out there, practice, have fun, and we'll see you guys next time.